Hello y'all on YouTube, this is Rob with Rob's Nerdy Knives. Today I have a very interesting review, impressions of a knife that Artisan Cutlery allowed a group that I'm part of, Apex Group, to get a hold of. This is the Xcellerator. And this is a pretty cool Artisan Cutlery knife. It has some of the touches of a high-end Artisan Cutlery, but seems to be, you know, more in line with a CJRB sort of budget line, which is part of Artisan Cutlery. I like this a lot. Oops, let me do that again. It is a big boy. It's not a small knife. This is definitely sort of a mini pocket sword or cleaver, whatever you want to call it. So if you're into big knives, you might want to check this out. It's kind of cool. It's unique in its perspective and everything, and we'll talk a little bit more about the knife as we get into the review and discuss everything that is important in a knife review, right? So we will talk a little bit about the manufacturer, which at this point is Artisan Cutlery, right? And then we'll talk a little bit about who's a maker. I really don't know. I think it's in-house machine, in-house design. This is the card that I have on there. The part number is the 1860P. This is the black micarta. So Artisan Cutlery and CJRB have a habit of just giving numbers to their knives. They don't really give them names, and names kind of come afterwards, but this is the Xcellerator. And Artisan Cutlery is the manufacturer, and I don't know the designer. And if anybody does know, please comment down below. I couldn't find it, so maybe I just missed it. But anyways, let's talk a little bit about the material of this knife. So I put this out here because it says blade steel is ARRP M9, which is a proprietary Artisan Cutlery design, and you'll see that right there on the knife. This is a steel that Artisan Cutlery designed themselves. It's a powder steel, so it's going to have a little better consistency and has some extra properties. Definitely a step up from D2, like ingot D2 or something like that. I would not say that it's maybe up there with Nitro V. How about that? It won't be up there with 14C28N, right? 14C28N is probably the best budget steel out there. Maybe it's like 9 MORV. Well, I can't even say it. You know, those other blends of steels. But it's a pretty good steel. I mean, I think you get a lot of bang for your buck out of that steel. So I think it's definitely worth it, right? It is micarta, contoured handles. I don't know if you can see that, contoured. So you got a nice little shape. I will say big blade, flat grind here, not all the way up. It's got a big, huge swedge, a nice thumb hole or fuller hole, whatever you want to call that. That seems to be the only deployment method. It's going to be that, right? The detent was pretty strong, so I could sort of middle finger flick it, but it's a big knife, right? Might have to, you know, adjust that if you want it to do that. It is a liner lock. You can see the lockup here on this is probably a good 40%. Good solid liner lock here. It's a steel liner. We'll just double check that real quick. Yeah, steel liner for sure. And that's a titanium clip right there. Yep, titanium clip and definitely steel liners. I believe that's a brass backspacer with a lanyard, kind of a pin, whatever you want to call it back there. Nicely stonewashed on the blade. Will cover up a lot of you know, issues or things that happen to the knife, so that's cool. I can't really do anything with this knife. Can't take it apart, do anything, because it is, you know, we want to keep it in the original state so everyone can experience the knife. I will tell you, the black micarta is very nice. I'm sure this will patina and kind of absorb the oils and look really nice after a while. It does have some sharp edges around there, which is unfortunate, like here and here, but we'll talk about that when we get into the design and all that. But it is liner lock, thumb hole only deployment, heavy cage ceramic ball bearings. Grind shape is a flat grind with a swedge, not all the way. Pretty heavy, thick blade. And you know, the way it closes is, you know, you drop the liner lock, it's got some weight to it, so it will be a guillotine. Be careful, make sure you catch that, you know, I don't know if you call that a thumb. It's more of a sharpening choil. I would say it's a finger choil, but this is way down, so really your finger choil is pulled away from the blade, which means you can choke up like this. So that is nice, right? You can choke up, so you have that finger choil there, or placement, if you will, almost like a trigger placement or whatever. But your original grip right here, I have medium to medium large hands. Notice I have pretty good, my hands are large width-wise, medium length-wise, so plenty of room here. I'd say extra large, double extra large could get up there, especially if you choke up. I mean, you can get some really big hands in there, right? And those big hands could really pull forward. You can definitely do a precision cut and everything, so that's that. All right, the Loctite we already talked about. It is a liner lock. Nothing, fantastic there. Pretty centered, but I can tell you that I've had a little movement of the pivot, and I can't really take it apart and put some Loctite on there. That's what I would do. You tighten it up, it seems to center back up again, so don't let that distract you. I do think that was because we can't really mess with the knife, and I'm going to leave it in the original position. But I would normally take that apart, put a little Loctite there, and I'll stop that movement. All right, let's do some measurements on here. You already saw this. By the way, the ARRP is 59 to 61 HRC, which I understand is supposed to be what they, expect. The liner lock is a ceramic ball. So structure bearing liner lock is a ceramic ball, so it does have a ceramic ball for the detent. That means in here there's a ceramic ball, and there's a hole on the knife that has a ceramic, the detent hole, and it goes along a detent track, and when it closes, you'll actually see, here I'll show you, you can hear the click. That clicks into that detent hole, the ceramic ball on the liner. So that's what that is. All right, let's do some measurements. See how much this guy weighs. Ooh, the reflection with the camera angle. Sorry about that. All right, so this is a big knife, 6.08 ounces. So 6.08 ounces is some pretty heavy weight for a knife, I would say. I don't think it's a light knife at all. Let's get some measurements in lengthwise. All right, so we're dealing with a knife that is just barely over 9 inches, so it's not small. We're looking at blade length. If we go to the base of the handle, we're right at 4 inches. If you don't, if you look at from the tip to the base of the top of the handle. If you look at cutting edge, we are probably at, what do I want to say? Probably 3.3 and I want to say 3 7/8, maybe. Yeah, 3 7/8 of an inch. So it's a pretty hefty blade. If we talk about where the hand first places, you got about 4 1/4 inch, but if we do the finger choil all the way up to the top, then we got a full 5 inches of handle length. So plenty of room for very, very large hands. That is interesting. All right, let's talk a little bit about, and oh, be careful when you drop this. You got to make sure you catch that. I think I already mentioned that, but just don't guillotine your finger or your thumb. All right. Oops, let's see here. This should be in inches. There we go. All right, so let's measure this blade stock thickness. We are looking at 148 thousandths of an inch, or I guess 0.149 inches. So it's right between 1/10 and 2/10 of an inch. It's a thick blade. I mean, it's a big blade, it's a thick blade, it has weight, it definitely falls down. So those are the measurements. Category. When I looked this knife up, I think it was just over $100. So this is definitely going to be, but it's just over $100. So it's definitely out of the budget realm, for me at least. I don't know if there's any variants that would make it a little bit cheaper, because this is a titanium clip, by the way. It's not reversible, so right hand tip up only. There's nothing there for the lefty, so sorry. But it is a liner lock, so lefties would still be able to enjoy the left reverse flick. They just might have to carry it with the knife blade out, which I don't know if I would do that. But anyways, or you can carry it in your back pocket, I guess. Some people do that as well. But the budget is definitely going to be a regular knife, just barely into the regular knife, just barely out of the budget realm. You get a lot, brass pivot, brass back spacer, titanium deep pocket carry clip, a nice micarta scales that go on top of the steel liners, a big ARRP M9 blade, definitely some weight. You're getting a lot of knife here, all right? The purpose, I would say this is definitely an EDC knife. So depending on what you want to EDC, if this is something that you would prefer to carry a larger knife, this would be a good option. If you don't like smaller knives, maybe this would be something that you would consider. I would say it's a really good work tool. The lockup is really solid. There's no blade play as long as the pivot is tight, right? You do need to tighten that pivot if you do and get some Loctite. But And one of the things you got to consider, when these are shipped around, we ship them to one another, and it could be 8, 10, 12 people in this group. So that's a lot of transports and airplanes and cars, and it's vibrating all the time. So it's not unusual if you don't have Loctite in there for a pivot to loosen up. That's kind of, you know, anytime, like any tool that you have tends to loosen any screws. So this is really not an unusual thing, but I would put Loctite in there. I just don't want you to be distracted by that, right? Some people might be, but definitely EDC hard use. I would feel comfortable with that. Now, I think gloves would be a great thing to use this, but we are going to talk a little bit about the handle design, some of the sharp corners. So when you do hard use, just be aware of that. Maybe you might need gloves, or if you've got really thick calluses on your hand and you don't work at a desk job like I do and who works on computers and stuff, you know, writing applications, then you will probably be fine. But if you work like I do, inside, indoor, and you just work in the yard and the weekends and stuff like that, you may not have the thicker calluses that maybe you had when you were younger. The sharp edges might be a point of discomfort at some point, especially if you like to fidget with a knife. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's not a collection piece for sure. I don't think so. I think it's more EDC, hard use kind of thing. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the ergonomics and the feel. So the design, it is a unique design. I do like that it's unique. It's not really in my wheelhouse or my aesthetic, but I do like the design. I think it's really cool. I think the blade shape is unique. It just reminds me of a little bit of like the WE Knives high fin, like a Gavco design, or you could call this a harpoon, I guess, maybe a harpoon blade. Maybe that's what we want to call it. It's like a drop point modified harpoon, whatever. I don't know. Call it what you want. I don't really care, but it's unique. I like that. I think it's pretty nice. I like the thickness of the blade. It's definitely going to be hard use for that. The design on the handle that I don't care for, these edges are sharp, okay? And even here in the corners, little things like that. So if you're using it and you're digging in and you're doing a hard cut, and after a while, that corner, it may not seem like a big deal, but if you're using the knife a lot, that digging in after a while could probably cause a blister, eventually cut into your hand. And if you're doing hard cutting, it could eventually rip and cut into you, right? There's the same thing here, this little edge with the liner lock. It sticks out, it's not chamfered. This is pretty sharp. And I noticed that right away. The edges everywhere are sharp. I mean, that could be great for, tool if you're, Friday night Slurpee defense there. Don't want anybody stealing your Slurpee, I guess. But this is also pretty sharp edges. It could be rounded a little bit more, especially for Artisan Cutlery. I was very disappointed to feel that. I would, if I owned this, I would definitely buff that out on a belt sander, because that's just too sharp. It's very uncomfortable. And you do feel it when you grip really hard. If you get the right angle, it digs in. It's just sharp, it's edgy. And I don't care for that. I think a nicer knife should definitely be rounded. If you're going to contour it, the whole point of contouring is get that nice shape and feel that you fit just naturally onto the knife. I'm not getting that, right? I'm getting edges and sharpness, which kind of a bummer. But again, if you're hard use and you're wearing a glove and you're out there beating the snot out of this knife, it may not matter. It'd be perfect, right? But, it's not going to be a Rick Hinder. It's not going to be an XM18. It's not going to be an Urban XL like Trevor Berger. It's not going to be a Olamic Custom Whippersnapper. It's not going to be any of those, fancy knives. It's not going to be a Sharp by Design, Evo Typhoon. It's not going to be even Chavez. The Chavez Rendition 229 kickstop has some sharp corners. I fixed that because I like that knife so much and I own it. That's what I would have to do with this one, definitely. But there you go. It is, I would say it's sort of like a budget nice knife, but it's not a budget knife. It's low-end knife category, just outside of budget knife category. So I think those ergonomics are okay. You have nice cutaway for the liner lock. It's nicely chamfered right there. So it's nice and easy access. It's not going to be hard to drop that lock. You just got to be careful when it falls down with the weight. But yeah, I mean, that's nice. But these edges, I don't know. They would really bother me. Okay, so that's just my opinion. It may not, if it does bother you, then go for it, right? But I just wanted to give you my impressions, things that I look at, because if they made a mini version of this, would I be interested? A mini version, that's not 9 inches, that maybe is 7.5 inches. That would be, something I would consider, right? That would be a little more EDC friendly for me. But for larger hands, larger folks, this might be just what you're looking for, right? A cool knife for sure. Has a lot of good things in there, just a small little nitpicking things that matter to me. I just want to be real honest about that. Opening and closing. The opening is really nice. That thumb hole or finger hole, whatever you want to call it, fuller hole, works really well. You get in there, you can get the full finger in there, get a nice snap deployment. You can get the meat of your finger in there and deploy it, right? You can do the same with the front finger, with the thumb, so it works really well. It works really well reverse, you know, I can get my finger in there. I can do front flicking like that, so that works really nice. I can sort of do a middle finger flick here. I've got to get the little grip, make sure there's no oil on my hand, but it's a heavy blade, so I've got to help that open if I'm going to do that. It's got a little wrist action going in there. Can't really just flick it because the weight of the blade sometimes is just massive. The closing is nice. Once you close it, it does drop really well. The cage ceramic ball bearings work really nicely. So, I mean, that's cool. Now, fidget factor, what would I say? Fidget factor scale, it's got a thumb hole, sort of that. So, you know, it's a single deployment for me. You can't really do that because it's really flat here, and it would be nice if that flat grind came up a little bit higher so you could have a little leverage to get underneath there. I mean, it might be easier to get down here. It's not, but it would be nice, right? But so fidget factor, I'm gonna give this probably a 4 out of 10 for potential fidget factor. I mean, the liner lock and everything is really nice. I mean, it's close to a 5, I guess, because you really great access to the liner lock. Yeah, maybe I'll give it a 5. Yeah, so we'll say 5. 5 for fidget capability, right? So that's a fidget scale. So 1 out of 10, I'm gonna give it a 5. That's what you can get the most fidgety goodness out of. So now, out of those 5, what's the fidgety goodness? What's the percentage of that you can really enjoy? I would say I'm gonna give it an 80, a B. It's a good solid B, because you can definitely deploy it, you can get in there, but sometimes because it's heavy, you've got to make sure you're really getting in there, right? Because it's so heavy, if you don't really get in there and deploy it, so let's see, yeah, you don't really deploy it, it'll come right back down on you, right? You got to get it in there. So larger hands, maybe this is a lighter knife, it's not a big deal, but if you got, you know, large hands like me, which would be, I would consider small for this knife, you got to keep that in mind. So fidgety goodness, I'd give it a B, and it would be just a B, not a B plus. It would be close to a B minus, I think, low B almost, because I don't know, the drop shutness and yeah, that's just kind of what I feel about it. But still pretty cool, still pretty nice, and still pretty solid. So that is good. What are my overall final thoughts? What are my overall and final thoughts, recommendations, all that stuff? Now remember, this is my recommendation for me, considering my hands, large, you know, width-wise hands, medium lengthwise fingers. Just understand that what I like, my aesthetics, this is just my opinion. So if there's something that you don't agree with me in my opinion, use that as a positive for you. If there's something you do agree with me, use that as a help and guide for you. But you know, that's okay. I watch many reviews where there's people I totally disagree with, and when they talk about something that bothers them, I know I'm going to like it. And when they talk about something that they don't, that they really like, I know I'm not going to like it. And that's okay. That's not necessarily true all the time, but you can certainly learn some of those things from folks, especially if there's a knife that they reviewed that you have, and you know, there's things that you notice and how they look at it. That's really helpful. So take that with a grain of salt. Just know that. I think it's a well-made knife. I think the materials are pretty good. There's a few factors for me that could make this a recommended knife. It's just not going to be a recommended knife for me. I think if I wanted to make this a recommended knife, this needed to be a little softened, especially a clip. That's too sharp. After a while, it's going to dig in. There's too many sharp corners around here that should be sharpened. This right here, when it locks, this is really catchy, and that to me is a big deal. Up here, sharp corners are going to be a big deal after a while, I think. And yeah, even the edges all the way around. These edges going all around, nothing chamfered whatsoever. It's just sharp. The contour is nice, but it would be nice if you're going to contour it, you'd chamfer some of that. Maybe you do a little weight relief. If you notice, there's no weight relief on the steel liners. You know, cut some of that out, because that's 6 inches. That's heavy. If it was a 6-inch blade, maybe it had good ratios. But I mean, we look at this knife. It is centered right there. But I mean, if you want to go up here, it's definitely back heavy, right? This is where you're going to be centered. So if you're looking for I guess a portable pocket sword, you know, a pseudo axe that I would never use for an axe, because I would never use a liner lock, a frame lock, any folding knife as an axe. Buy an axe. you know, or get a fixed blade if you're out. But I mean, if you're stuck in the woods and this is all you got, then that's a pretty good option for a lot of heavy duty stuff, I think. You just got to be careful, and especially if you got to get, you know, some calluses build up. But that's why, I mean, those are my biggest gripes, I would say, for this. It would be nice if the grind was a little bit higher so you could get better access here. That would make it a little more nice and slicey. I mean, it comes fairly to a thin edge, but it's not super thin. It's a thick blade, right? It's got a nice swedge, so you're going to be cutting through. It definitely allows you to guide that, but only up this part. When you get here, there's no swedge, so you got to have you navigate your cuts right here. That means most likely you want to cut up and do that, right? You can choke up, so that's kind of cool, right? And it's a liner lock, so you can left-hand it pretty well. Wish it would be reversible for the clip. That would be great for lefties. I don't care about the lanyard hole, but it has one, so if you like that, there you go. The jimping is not too bad up here. It's not super aggressive. It does work, certainly works, but there's no other jimping anywhere. And when you choke up here and you use that jimping, man, that just digs the snot into my, you can see that little dent. That dent goes in there, and if you're cutting for any extended period of time, that dent's that's gonna cause a blister or cut you. So those are my biggest gripes why I can't really recommend it. Now, like I said, with gloves, hard use, if you got really thick calloused hands, you're a carpenter, you know, one of those guys that works really hard. I tip my hat to you, and I respect you 100% because my father-in-law, he was a mechanic, a large machine mechanic in a hospital. He had the strongest hands for anybody I knew, and he was not a tall, large man. He just had powerfully massive hands. He could tighten bolts with his hands better than I could sometimes with tools when I was young. It just blew me away how strong his hands were. But yeah, he would have no problem with this. Obviously, his hands it wouldn't bother him at all. So, you know, take that in mind. But, you know, if you want a knife that's more ergonomic, that's more rounded, that's more contoured, that's comfortable for longer, you may maybe have second thoughts about this or be willing to modify it. That's going to be my thought. So those are my overall thoughts. Hey, what do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Please comment down below. Do you have any questions about the knife? Do you have any questions about my perspective? Maybe you have something, you own this knife and you have a different perspective. Feel free to comment down below. Love to hear it. I learn from you guys, as hopefully you learn a little bit from me as well. I think that's the neat thing about the whole knife community. This is a place to learn and experience things. Sometimes my experience could be wrong. I didn't think about something, and that's true. I mean, I've learned that with several knives where I had a negative experience and I kind of thought, you know, one thing or another, and it turns out that I probably had a defect on a knife or I missed something completely. So, you know, that's okay. That's what it is. We learn about knives. We grow as we, you know, our knife collections and our knife journey. So there you go. But again, I'd love to hear from you. Hey, if you got any ideas for future Rob's Ramblings or other thing, this might be close to Rob's Rambling with the way I've talked about this knife here. You might think that, but it's not. Rob's Ramblings truly rambles. This is just impressions, if you will. So, but, you know, I do like the knife. I think there's a lot of positive. It's going to be more positive for larger hands, you know, more work-focused hands, gloves, use kind of things, and I think you might really love this. But if you have any perspective or experience like mine, I would not recommend it. That's just where I stand. So there you go. All right, so if you found this content fun, interesting, worthwhile, or entertaining, would you please consider hitting that like button down below? And if you've hit that like button, would you also consider hitting the subscribe button? Subscribing and liking the videos really helps out the channel, allows me to grow, to produce more content, do more things. I really would appreciate that. And if you've done all that, maybe hit that notification button as well so you can be notified of future content when it's dropped. Hey, and if you've done all that, maybe also just go over to Rob's Nerdy Knives on Instagram and check me out. Again, that's on Instagram at Robs_nerdy_knives. Again, that's Robs_nerdy_knives on Instagram. Hey, thanks so much for watching today. Have a great day and a great week. Bye.